Welcome back to America Decides. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on President Trump's plan to end birthright citizenship next month. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. But on President Trump's first day in office, he issued an executive order to end that right for the children of people who are in the U.S. illegally. New Jersey is one of several states challenging that order, and the state's Attorney General, Matthew Platkin, joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us, Attorney General. I want to ask you about oral arguments, which are set to begin on May 15th. Of course, there are 6 Republican-appointed justices, and I wonder, how you are feeling with just a couple weeks away before they are set to hear this case.
Well, thanks for having me. And look, every court that has looked at this issue has came out the same way for the very obvious reason, because we settled this debate 157 years ago after the Civil War, when we said we would no longer debate whether babies born on American soil were in fact entitled to the rights and privileges of American citizenship. And what the court is going to hear next month is both whether the 14th Amendment is clear, which it is, but also whether states should be treated differently, whether citizens of this country should be, or citizenship in this country should be decided based on what state you're in. Not only whether or not you were born in this country, but which state in this country you're born in. And that's never been the case in American history.
Well, President Trump weighed in last week after he found out the Supreme Court was going to take up this case. I want to play for you a little of what he said.
I think the case has been so misunderstood. That case, birthright citizenship, is about slavery. Look at the dates on which it was signed. It was right at that era, right after the Civil War. And if you look at it that way, the case is an easy case to win. It was meant to be positive, and they use it now instead, not for slavery, they use it for people that come into our country and they walk in and all of a sudden they become citizens and they pay a lot of money to different cartels and others.
Your response to that, Attorney General, because, the Supreme Court has taken up other cases since then, right, to affirm that the 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States, including a Chinese man who was born here. He left to visit his family. He was denied re-entry, but ultimately his case went to the Supreme Court, and they said he was a citizen of the U.S., so he could come back.
That's absolutely right. I agree with the president on one thing in this case. It is an easy case to decide. That's because the United States came together after the Civil War and made very clear not what the president is saying, but that the debate about whether children born on U.S. soil would be citizens was settled. We would never again have this debate. And as you note, Weija, in the 1890s, the Supreme Court heard the exact case you just referenced and said, yes, if you were born here, you are an American. And what the president is doing, it's broader than just an attack on birthright citizenship. It's an attack on the rule of law. It's an attack on the rights and privileges that people have in this country. And people have rights here. Birthright citizenship, immigrants more broadly. And the president does not get to rewrite the Constitution with a stroke of a pen. And that's why I believe, regardless of who appointed the justices on the Supreme Court, the rule of law is going to prevail in this case.
And, we hate to talk about hypotheticals. We hate to talk about big ifs. But what are the consequences? What are the impacts, potentially, if birthright citizenship came to an end?
Well, there's a whole host of really serious consequences that would occur. So just think about it. The order doesn't say what these babies are. It just says what they're not. It says they're not American citizens. Okay, but it doesn't say what country they are a citizen of. Remember, they're born here. They know no other country. They've never been anywhere. It doesn't say what rights and privileges they're entitled to. So you'd have this second class of residents of our country that we've never had before in law. And in New Jersey alone, that's 6,000 babies every year. It's hundreds of thousands across the country. And just think about the idea of citizenship being decided by what state you're on. If you're a mother giving birth in South Jersey and your child is at risk, a lot of people choose to go to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia because it's a very, very good hospital. Pennsylvania is not a part of our suit. So is the president really saying, is the Supreme Court really going to say that that child should be a citizen based on which hospital his parent selects. I don't think that's what the 14th Amendment drafters meant. I don't think anybody has ever thought the Supreme Court or birthright citizenship should be decided that way.
This, of course, is just one of several legal cases we are tracking involving President Trump and the administration and his executive orders. And there are legal experts in other cases that would argue that he is, not complying with Supreme Court rulings and decisions. So can you talk about whether you're worried that the administration will ignore the Supreme Court's ruling if it is not in his favor?
Well, I think every American should be concerned by statements by the president, the vice president, the attorney general that have raised the specter that they will not comply with orders from any court, including the United States Supreme Court. Our nation is built on the rule of law, and part of that means we adhere to court orders, whether or not we agree with them. We don't like a lower court, we can appeal it. We can appeal it up to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is the final court. And this administration has threatened to not follow the law. And I hope the American people, if that were to come to pass, will stand up and make clear their perspective. Because if we lose that in this country, then we no longer live in a democracy. We no longer live in a country that is governed by the rule of law.
New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin, thank you so much, and we hope to see you again on this program.